What's up, everybody? Do you guys know what's the difference between my videos and Mr. Beast's videos? The only difference is that Mr. Beast's videos really struggle to get views, whereas mine obviously do not. Now guys, in this video, we're going to be covering everything in just one video that you need to know for C3.1. I know there's a ton of stuff, and this video is probably long, probably going to be an hour and a half or so, I'm guessing. But it's going to cover everything that you need to know. So stick through this video and I'm sure you'll nail that test. Now guys, who's this here? This is our perfectionist from the movie The Incredibles. And she will not recommend anything unless it's perfect. And look here, she even here is recommending you to go check out teachme.org. Awesome notes, beautiful notes, and tons of IB style questions to help you guys nail your final exam. So go check it out. Trust me, you don't want to miss this out. So let's get started and go through this hell of a video, guys. But I think it's really interesting, at least, this video. So hopefully you keep it fun and interesting for you guys. So let's start off here, real nice and basic to keep you guys nice and motivated. You know us, we're organisms, right? And there's actually levels to us, and I'll show you what I mean. What are we made up of? What's the most basic unit we're made up of? Cells, right? We're made up of billions of these cells. And we have so many different kinds of cells, muscle cells, neurons, kidney cells, right? All of these. And how are they all so different? Why do we have so many different kinds of cells if they all have the same DNA? Because each of our cells have the same DNA. That's because our cells don't necessarily follow the same instructions. So maybe your muscle cell will only read the instructions that apply to muscle cells, and therefore it becomes a muscle cell. And your neuron will only read instructions that allow it to become a neuron. So despite having the same DNA, they only listen to certain instructions in the DNA to do their specific part, to carry out their particular specialized function. Now, let me ask you this. Is one single muscle cell useful to you? No, right? No way. So we need a bunch of these cells to work together. In order for you to have a fully functioning bicep, you need a lot of these muscle cells working together. So we call the collection of cells tissues. Okay, so for example, using our muscle cells here, a bunch of these individual muscle fibers together, working together, that is a tissue, okay? And that makes them useful, okay? Because a single cell is not very useful. Now, you guys do not need to know about this. I'm not going to say it, but we have 4 different types of basic tissues. And I'm not going to mention it because you guys really don't need to know it. Just know that tissues are groups of these cells that have similar structure, like muscle cells, that work together to carry out a specific function, okay? Now, let's build it one step further. Organs. What's an organ? An organ is something comprised of multiple tissues. So let's take stomach as an example. This is our beautiful stomach. Here's our esophagus, right? Gonna come from above, and our food drains into here. Stomach mixes and mashes everything, breaks it down, and it goes out here, after which it will go into our small intestines. Now, our organ, what's cool about it, okay? It's made up of multiple tissues. In this stomach, we have muscle tissue, okay, to allow it to contract and mix the food. But is that it? No. We have nervous system tissue. We have nerves here that's going to stimulate these muscles to contract. Is that it? No. We have cells that line our stomach that help absorb the food into our bloodstream. That's another kind of tissue. So you can see we have so many kinds of tissues working together. We call that an organ, okay? That's really important. So we can see here, a combination of cells is a tissue. A combination of tissues is an organ, okay? What's next? One of you can guess. Systems. Of course, right? Do you think our stomach is the sole organ that we need to carry out the process of digestion and absorption and getting all the nutrients to our body? No, we need so many more organs, right? And we call that our digestive system. So our digestive system is one kind of system, and it's comprised of multiple organs. Not only your stomach, look here, we got our stomach, yeah, that's one part, but there's also the large and small intestines. There's our liver, it's a part of it. Even back here, I'm gonna show you the spleen, this guy here, he also plays a role, right? So you can see a system is a collection of organs that carry out related functions, okay? All of these carry out a related functions. They're different. Like the stomach and the intestines don't do the exact same thing, but they carry out a related function, in this case, related to the process of digestion and absorption, all related to food, right? So this is our digestive system. And we have many other kinds of systems, right? So here's a beautiful kind of definition. I like the way this is phrased. It's a combination of organs which carry out related functions, right? So, for example, a system cannot be the lung and the stomach because they are not carrying out related functions. They are not part of the same system. They're part of different systems, okay? That together serve to carry out a larger function. So we have many systems. Think of some right now. Think how many can you think of, right? Your digestive system, cardiovascular system, you got your immune system, you got your nervous system. We got so many. I think there's like 10 or 11. You can go look up in the internet, but it's not very important for you guys. Just know the definition here. Okay, what's next? What's above a system? Multiple systems together form what? Us, me and you, organisms. Like Mr. Bean here, right? He has a nervous system. He also has a digestive system, a cardiovascular system, a respiratory system, immune system, endocrine system, all of these systems working together to allow him to exist and carry out the functions of life, right? All of his systems, I want to put this here, work together. Okay, this is very important, this sentence. All these systems work together. If he only had a digestive system, he wouldn't be able to survive and carry out the functions of life because his digestive system depends on his cardiovascular system to send nutrients and blood to supply the cells. But then all of these systems depend on the nervous system, the brain, to trigger and catalyze and trigger everything to happen and send signals to make things happen. Our immune system, without our immune system, this guy would get sick and die any moment. So you need to understand that none of our systems work in isolation. They work in unison. They interact, combine, work together, depend on each other. So this requires appropriate coordination. Okay, and we're going to learn a lot more about this in this video. How these systems work together, how they interact to allow us to be an organism. Okay, that's very, very cool. I'm a little bit sick, guys. If you hear me sniff every now and then, excuse me. But, you know, this video needs to come up. You guys wanted it this weekend, so can't wait. So I'm doing this. Okay, so I want to use this idea here of a little band to introduce a keyword that you guys need to know. Could come up in multiple choice or something like that. You know, an individual instrument in a band sounds okay together. Sounds okay, right? But if you put them all together, they create an orchestra, something beautiful, right? Something even better than the individual instruments could, right? So if we relate this to our body, we call this an emergent property. An emergent property. The same way these instruments together make something better than they do alone, our systems do the same thing. The individual systems, the individual organs have a cool job, but alone they cannot do something great. But together, putting all of these systems together, we have something remarkable, a living organism. So same way as this band, okay? So here's a little definition of that. An emergent property, these are properties that exist when the sum of all the parts creates features that do not exist within the individual components, right? The muscle, your arm, although it's great, there's muscle and there's bone, without your nervous system, this is never going to move. You're never going to lift that dumbbell. You're never going to punch that guy in the face, right? Nothing is going to happen. They depend on each other. That's an emergent property, and I hope that makes sense, okay? So that's the real big kind of cool concept that you guys need to get in your head right now, okay? But I really hope this makes sense so far for you guys. And of course, I love to talk about organisms like me and you, like human beings, but no, this idea, this levels of an organism, cells, tissues, organs, and stuff like that, it does also apply to other organisms like a lion, a plant, okay? Other living things, not just this, but I think it's more relatable if I use humans for you guys. Now I want to show you a very interesting example of integration. So integration is simply just a word to describe all our body systems being integrated, working together, allowing us to be this organism, right? So how they're integrated and working together. So say you're here, right? You're this person and you're reading this book or looking at your phone or whatnot, or you're doing something of your hobby, reading about football or UFC, like fighting or boxing or whatever. You're doing something that you like, right? Maybe it's something stupid like art of video games, right? And you're in public and you suddenly see your teacher and you're like, oh gosh, oh no, I'm not reading my science book. It's not good. He's going to see me. And then you accidentally make contact, something a student never wants to do with his teacher in public. So he does it. Now what's going to happen to you? Your body systems are going to respond. Like for sure mine would. So many things are going to happen. In my mind, I'm going to bolt out of there instantly. Now, the moment you start running away from there, okay, to escape this terrifying scenario, what happens to you? so many things, to your systems. You can imagine your mind, right? Oh, you saw him, you smelled him, you heard him. You're taking all of these signals in. That's part of your nervous system, right? Your nervous system, your brain is taking in all these signals, right? So there's so many things involved, okay? Your brain, what else? Your muscles and your heart and your lungs, and everything is working together. Your lungs are gonna start breathing faster. You're gonna take in more air because you're gonna run now. And your cells, when you're running, they need more oxygen. And your heart needs to pump to bring that blood to your muscles so you can contract these muscles, these tiny, tiny legs, and run as fast as you can, right? To get away from this person. So you can see just in this instant moment, this small moment, your whole organ systems integrated, okay? Integrated together to allow you to carry out this function of getting away, right? So it's very important to never think of your systems as working alone. They always work together. They always respond and communicate with each other to allow you to carry out this function. So that's just a silly little example that I want you guys to be aware of, okay? There's nothing to memorize here. It's just a little example so you get the big picture, guys. So the next question is, what exactly is responsible for controlling us, for controlling our systems to do their thing at the right time and right place? What makes sure that right in this moment, your legs don't go numb and limp so you can't run away, or your heart rate just decreases so you die? What is controlling everything? What is integrating all our body systems to work together? We can break this down into two basic systems that do this: our endocrine system and our nervous system, right? Both of these are responsible for controlling and regulating all our systems to work together well so that we can exist properly as an organism, okay? Now, we can break down our control into two categories, right? This is kind of obvious when you think about it. Some things that you do is conscious, okay? When you run away, that's conscious, right? That some communication is conscious. We're aware of it. You are telling your legs to run away. You're aware of this. It's part of our conscious integration and communication, okay? But some things are unconscious, like for example, digesting your food or increasing your heart rate. This is not down to you, but your systems, your endocrine system and your nervous system, they are doing this at a subconscious or unconscious level. You're not aware of this happening. Imagine you had to think about breaking down your food, how busy you'd be all the time. Because you do some homework, oh, break down some more food. Do some homework, break down some more food. Like, thank goodness we don't have to think about everything we do, right? So just know some things in our body is part of our conscious awareness or our awareness, and some things we're unaware of. Now, the two things controlling it, again, are these two. And we're going to compare them left and right here a little bit, okay? Because they're both very important to controlling everything and making sure everything goes right. In another video, we go into detail on the nervous system, right? Like, I think there's a whole video on that. So this is, if you don't get everything perfectly, don't worry. The purpose is not to focus on understanding everything about neurons and how signals are sent. There's a whole other video on that, okay? So we'll only cover what you need to know for this chapter. Okay, cool. Here, this is our endocrine system. So your endocrine system is a bunch of little organs. So you can see here, all these ones in red: your thyroid gland, your pancreas, your adrenal gland, your testicles, your testes, or your ovaries, or if you're a female. All of these glands comprise our endocrine system. Endocrine is like the science way of saying hormone. So it's the hormone system, okay? And all of these organs, they make hormones, and these hormones will have a different function, okay? Depending on what the hormone is, okay? And the nervous system, all right, this is another system. This is your brain, your spinal cord, all your nerves. These send electrical impulses. So not hormones. This system sends electrical messages, maybe from your brain to your muscle, or maybe from your skin to your brain to feel pain or sensation. This is one system that can control things, just like your endocrine system, but in a different manner. So let's compare them and see how they're different, because you guys need to know this. You guys can think of this whole thing as like, if you're in a group and you're doing a group project, if there's no communication, you guys just go home and work on whatever you think you should work on. You guys will not get anything done, and you guys will do the wrong thing. You'll not work properly towards the common goal, and the final product will just be crap. So imagine if there was no proper communication by these two systems for our body, then we wouldn't be able to function properly as an organism. So that's why these two are very important to control and integrate everything well. Okay, so we already said this. The endocrine system is comprised of these endocrine glands, hormone secreting factories. The nervous system is comprised of your central nervous system, brain, brainstem, spinal cord, and your peripheral nervous system, PNS, which is like the nerves coming off or going towards your spinal cord. That's your peripheral nervous system. We're going to be looking more at this later in this video. So, hormones, when they are made by these factories, they are sent into the bloodstream. And in the bloodstream, they can travel to their target tissue. For example, okay, you guys learned this in another video, but the pancreas makes insulin, and insulin will travel in the bloodstream and go to the body. For example, one of its target tissues is the liver, and it will tell the liver to do certain things to regulate your glucose levels. It will go to the cells of your body to stimulate them to take up glucose, right? So depending on which tissues are the target areas, this hormone will only affect those areas. So although the hormone can go everywhere, it will only affect the cells that have the receptor for that hormone. Otherwise, it will have no effect, okay, on those tissues. And again, these are by neurons. Okay, endocrine system, so the hormones, everything is involuntary, okay? All of these effects, what these hormones do, it's out of your control. Whereas the nervous system, there are two categories. Some things are voluntary and some things are involuntary. For example, digestion, where the nerves are sent to your digestive system to break down your food and for the stomach to contract. You're not in control of that, so that's involuntary. But when you flex your bicep, that's voluntary. So this one can have both voluntary and involuntary actions, okay? Now, the thing about this is the speed. And the reason why I'm doing this slide like this is because when you guys are asked to compare and contrast the endocrine system, if you have this and you write this, you're good to go. So I'm trying to make it as easy as possible to make it easy for an exam question to answer this. Now, for the endocrine system, the responses are usually slow, but they're long-lasting. Why is this? Imagine if this organ has to release, or this gland has to release a hormone. It first has to travel very far by the bloodstream to get to its target organ, bind to the receptor of the cell, and then cause a response. That's slow. Whereas a nervous system, these messages are sent so rapidly by these nerves, so super fast, way faster than the hormones travel in the bloodstream. So this effect happens very quickly, in an instant, very, very quick. That's why as soon as you see someone that you're scared of, your heart rate will instantly increase because of these nervous systems stimulating your heart to contract faster. But they're very short-lived because once the signal is sent, that's it, then it's over. But these hormones, they can circulate in your bloodstream over and over in a cycle and keep having its effect for a bit longer. Okay, so that's two differences. One regarding the speed of onset and the speed of how long it lasts. Okay, so that's the two key systems that are involved in controlling our body. And we're going to see much more about it in this video. And actually, going back here to the intro, I wanted to show here, this video is really split into what we just talked about, levels of organization and integration, and then two other parts. We're going to talk about all the ways in which our nervous system, so this system, is controlling our body, okay, and integrating all these systems to work together. And then we're going to also talk about how the endocrine, what role the endocrine system plays here, hormones integration, and how it can regulate our body. So that's really the two key big things we're going to talk about here, our nervous system integration and our hormone integration. And then we're going to do some questions. Okay, so it really is a big video, but I think it's going to make sense this way for all of you guys. Okay, awesome. So now we're done here with this levels of organization and introduction to what integration is and all of that. So now let's go into the first massive part, which is going to be the nervous system and how it's involved in integrating all of our body functions, okay? So here we go. So we know we can break our nervous system, right, into two big categories. And remember, nervous doesn't mean like the emotion, like you're nervous of something. Nervous system just refers to our body system that is comprised of two parts, central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system. So our central nervous system, because it's more in the center of our body, is comprised, you can think of it like the big boss, right? And you'll see how. It's comprised of two or three things rather, our brain stem, and our spinal cord, okay? So that's the things that make up our central nervous system. And guess what cell makes up our nervous system? Our neuron, our little nerve cell, right? All of these are made up of teeny tiny little nerve cells that can extend over long distances or short distances and all of that, right? But you guys learn a lot more about the neuron and how it works in a whole other chapter. So it's really the overview here for you guys. Now, what's the purpose of our central nervous system? So our central nervous system, what it's responsible for is receiving information from our body, like our muscles, our organs, and thinking about what to do with that information, maybe storing it as a memory, maybe initiating a response, like maybe now flex your bicep, now digest your food, now increase your heart rate. So it's basically the big boss. It does the decision making and processing. So it can receive information, it can interpret the information, and it can initiate a response. That's really the big idea. Now, the peripheral nervous system is anything coming off of our central nervous system. Okay, so our little nerves going to our muscles, our heart, our organs, going from our skin back to our central nervous system, anything that is not part of the central nervous system. And I really like to think of this as the worker of the big boss. Whatever the central nervous system says to do, these guys will go and do. And they will even bring information to the central nervous system like, ooh, don't touch that, it's hot. It'll bring that signal to your central nervous system, and your central nervous system can decide what to do with that. So it's really just a little guy who brings information to and from our central nervous system, okay? Now, we can break down our peripheral nervous system into two big parts. This is really important for you guys to understand. Two parts, somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system, okay? Somatic nervous system, it's going to be all of these nerves coming off or going to our central nervous system that we are conscious about, that we are aware about. For example, motor neurons. When you want to contract your bicep, you're aware of that. That nerve or that neuron will be part of your somatic nervous system. Anything that's voluntary or that we're consciously aware of. Okay. Also sensory. When you feel the heat outside, that nerve that carries it to your central nervous system, that is part of your somatic nervous system because we're consciously aware of that, okay? That's very important. Now, the other one, autonomic, I love to think of autonomic, and I'm going to put this big brain tip here because there's space here, but it should really be on this side. You can think of autonomic as automatic, as in we're unconscious, it's an unconscious system. We're not aware of it. We don't control it. It's involuntary. So, for example, these nerves can comprise of what we call our parasympathetic neurons. Okay, these neurons are basically neurons that fire to our organs or our body that tells it to rest and digest. Okay, so we're not aware of this. When we digest our food, we don't control that. That's why this is part of our autonomic nervous system. Okay, when our heart rate slows down when we're resting, this is part of our autonomic nervous system. We're not really aware or we're not in control of slowing down our heart, right? Now, the opposite category is sympathetic nerves. These nerves or these neurons do the opposite things. They unconsciously get us ready for fight or flight. Okay, so increasing our heart rate, increasing our breathing rate, increasing release of other things, okay, that we're not aware of, okay? And then our last one here is our enteric nervous system, sometimes known as the ENS. This one is a whole nervous system, a whole bunch of nerves on our digestive system that we talked about before, that controls our digestion and the movement of our food along our GI tract, okay? Because we're not aware of this either. So there's three big categories, okay? And I want to point out that this one, our ENS, can be influenced by these two nerves. Okay, our parasympathetic nerves or sympathetic nerves. Because when you're relaxed, these parasympathetic nerves will tell your ENS to stimulate digestion so you can break down food. Because now you're relaxed, you're not under stress, we can break down our food and move on with our day. But when you're very stressed, these nerves will tell the ENS and inhibit them from breaking down our food and moving our food along. That's why you kind of get constipated when you're very stressed, right? Because the sympathetic nerves are inhibiting your ENS. So you're not really doing digestion properly, okay? So in general, our PNS, the function is to carry information to the CNS or away from the CNS, okay? Those things can either, the information being carried to or away can either be part of our somatic nervous system, meaning we're consciously aware of it, or we're not aware of it, in which case it's part of our autonomic nervous system. So what I have here is really all you need to know about this idea. So if you don't completely understand it, that's fine, because for the IB, they don't give you enough information to truly get it. So this is already, in my opinion, all right for you guys. Hopefully this big idea makes sense. Now, here's a little summary of what I did here, just in a little like diagram sort of way, so you understand the composition of our nervous system. So again, our nervous system here, central, which is made up of 3 parts, and our peripheral, which has the conscious part, the somatic part, and then our unconscious part, okay? Make sure you understand this basic sort of outline. Okay, now I promised you guys, remember, our nervous system is made up of which cell? The neuron. So real quick as a recap, because this is explained in detail in the video where you guys learn about neurons and synaptic transmission and action potentials and all that. So it's not part of this chapter, okay? It's just you guys need to recap this because it's important to know about the nervous system since we're talking about it. So a neuron, right? It's an individual cell that carries these impulses from one point to another, usually from this area here, where the dendrites are, to the terminal area here. And then remember, see this little blue line here in the middle, the axon? It has sometimes these cells wrapped around it, okay? We call these Schwann cells, okay? You can see they're literally wrapping around the axon. And what their whole purpose is to speed up the sending of the signal through the nerve, okay? And you guys learn about that in that other video, okay? And these parts in between here, in between these Schwann cells is called the node of Ranvier, okay? So that's really, I don't want to go more into that because it's not the purpose of this video. Now, there's one thing you do need to know the difference between, that's nerve and neuron. So a neuron is the cell. Now, in your body, and I want to point out, for example, in your arm, one of the nerves is the ulnar nerve. You guys don't need to know about that, but this nerve is a little thick wire, and it's made up of many neurons, okay? So a nerve, when many individual neurons, so nerve cells, are grouped together, we call it a nerve. So this ulnar nerve will have many neurons comprising it. Now, a neuron can either be motor or sensory. So either it is carrying a signal from, coming back to it, let me show you, from your central nervous system away, or it's carrying it from away towards your central nervous system. It can only be one of those two, right? Cannot be both. So one neuron cannot do both. One neuron cannot carry a signal that way and this way. It's only one way. But a nerve, since a nerve is made up of many neurons, a nerve could potentially be mixed. So for example, the ulnar nerve, it has both sensory neurons. So for example, this nerve, make sure that you have sensation on these 2 fingers. And if it's damaged, you'll be very numb in this area. But not only that, when it's damaged, because it's also because it also has motor neurons, you will lose some strength in these fingers as well. So a nerve can be mixed. And when we say a nerve is mixed, what we mean is it has both motor and sensory neurons comprising it, okay? So a neuron cannot be mixed because a neuron can either be sensory or motor, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So you can see here in this picture, this is a scanning electron microscope. And this is just a light microscope. So we can see here all of these, the blue is the axons, right? And the wrapping around, it could be the myelin sheath. So we can see these are the neurons, and then a whole crap ton of neurons together forms this big nerve, okay? So hopefully this idea makes sense to you. It's not, don't worry about this part too much. It's not the focus of the video, but it's still part of this chapter though. So given now that we've covered what CNS is and PNS, and again, recap the neuron structure, now we're gonna go into some completely new territory for you guys, the brain. Okay, remember, what was the brain? The brain was one part of our CNS. We're gonna look now at the brain anatomy. So remember here, our CNS, right? One component of our central nervous system was our brain. This little organ, this crazy mad organ that scientists barely understand, right? Or not even close to understanding it. It's that complicated. But for you guys, luckily, IB students, you don't have to know that much. Now, the brain is pretty cool. Again, what cell is the brain made of? Neurons, these little freaky guys that we just covered, right? Made up of tons and tons and tons of these guys. Now look here. I want to give you some perspective first. So here's our brain, okay? The brain. Notice we're looking from the front. So imagine you're looking at your best friend right now. Just imagine they have no skull. Okay, you can see here, maybe some of your friends have very small brains, you know, some of them not that clever, but whatever. You got your friend here, you're looking at their brain. So this would be their right side, and this would be their left side. Notice how it's symmetrical. So there's 2 kinds of hemispheres. There's a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. Okay, notice that. And we can see here comes the spinal cord. So this is the view you would see of a brain when you look from the front. Now, what if we look from this the side? So right now we're looking from the side view. We're looking from the left side. So imagine your friend is looking that way. So now you are, imagine this is your eye. You are looking this way now. You're looking at his left side of his head. Okay, this is what you're gonna see. You're going to see this big part. So now you see only one hemisphere. Remember how we said this part here. This, by the way, this big part that you see here, this is the cerebrum. So you can see this is the left side and this is the right side. The left hemisphere, the right hemisphere. So this big bulky part that we normally think of as the brain, that's the cerebrum. It's got two parts, left and right. But since you're looking now from the left side, you're only seeing the left hemisphere. Okay. Now, what is this thing back here? This is still part of your brain, but it's called the cerebellum. It's this thing here, you can see here. Okay, it's at the back and it wraps around a little bit. So that's why you can see it a little bit from the front. This is the cerebellum. Okay, we're going to see all about the functions of these that you need to know about later. And then here, coming from our brain here, coming down is our brain stem. And then our brain stem eventually becomes our spinal cord. Okay, so this is the big idea here. Okay, so I just want you guys to understand perspective, otherwise you're going to be lost throughout this video. So now what are we doing? We're looking now at this one. Okay, we're going to look now at making it bigger, because bigger is better, right? And we're going to break it down now to a bit more detail that you guys need to know. But this, imagine your friend's now looking this way. We're still looking now at the left side. But what we're going to do now is make some imaginary categories. So scientists obviously love to complicate things. In reality, when you look at the brain, there's no lobes, there's no clear categories, right? So scientists, based on doing experiments and figuring out what parts of the brain do what, they made 4 lobes. You can see here, 1 lobe, 2 lobe, 3 lobe, 4 lobe. So 4 lobes per hemisphere. So this side will have 4 lobes, this side will have 4 lobes. So these here, these colors that I made is imaginary. There's no clear separation. The scientists made these imaginary lobes based on the function, because each lobe has a different function. So that's why I made the colors. So in reality, there's no clear separations when you look at a brain. It's made by scientists for the sake of understanding the brain a bit better. So you can see here these 4 lobes, okay? So now imagine we're gonna slice now open the brain. We're gonna basically slice it open, okay? When we're looking this way, now we're removing the left hemisphere. We're taking it away. Look, I'm taking away completely the left hemisphere. So now we're looking at the right hemisphere from this side. So we're looking sort of at the inside here of the right hemisphere, okay? So we're looking at the inside here. So we're looking at the middle of the brain. So you can see here, this here would be the right hemisphere's lobes, right? That's why the pink part, this purple part is going to be on the other side of this person's head. That's why it's kind of sticking out here at the bottom, okay? Hopefully that view makes sense. Need some imagination there, guys. And then here, obviously, when we slice this thing in half, we're also going to slice this guy in half, the cerebellum in half. So now we can see everything more clearly. The more structures, because we're going to label the ones that you guys need to know about. Okay, so you can see here a lot of things going on. We got this whole part, the gray thing here, the thing I made here gray, this you guys do not need to know about. So the gray thing here, I put it here for accuracy purpose, but you guys do not need to worry about any structures here. So now let's get to some labeling, guys, some labeling for you guys. And then, so remember here, I put structure, and then we'll talk a little bit about the function. Hopefully it'll make sense for you guys. But okay, so here we got some labels. So we're first going to label our cerebrum. Remember our cerebrum, this big thing we see on the outside, and I said it has these imaginary lobes. Let's label these lobes, okay? So this one here in the front, you can see the person's looking this way. This one in the front, guess what we call it? Very complicated name, frontal lobe, okay? Okay, very good. And then this one here by the side, it's on, since this person is looking this way, it's going to be on the other side of their head, at the right side. This is on your temporal region, right? If you get hit here, you pass out, basically. It's the very sensitive region of your brain. This is the temporal lobe, okay? It's on the temporal side. And then this here in the back, this one here in the back, this green part is the occipital lobe, okay? Occipital lobe, that's a bit of a complicated name, unfortunately. And this one here, the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe, okay? So all of these 4 lobes comprise one of our hemispheres, one of our cerebrums, okay? So coming back to this one here, I just want to clearly label here. So this would be your temporal lobe. from this perspective, let's label them: temporal lobe, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, okay? Now, let's some other structures. So now that we're done with the cerebrum, what are some other structures we need to know about? What is this one here? It's going to be your spinal cord, okay? Spinal cord. Again, don't worry about the functions. We're going to cover them. And in this area here, spinal cord, above, that's linked to the spinal cord, going to the brain, is called your brain stem. Brain stem. This will be important later in this video as well. And then here, look at this one. Looks like a little ball sack, right? This is your pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. Now, connecting to the pituitary gland in the center of the brain, you can see they're connected, is the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. It's right above the pituitary gland. And then here, this little purpley part here sticking out. It's a very small part here. This is your pineal gland. It's very important with sleep. We're going to see much more about that later. And then here, this big thing, the cerebellum. Okay, this is called your cerebellum. We already labeled it up there. So now we labeled all the structures. Now that we've labeled all the structures, we're more familiar with the key things you guys need to know. So don't worry about any of the gray things. Everything I'm labeling, that's what you should know. So now we're going to go into the function. So up until this point, you should have no idea what the parts of the brain do, anything like that. You should only be familiar with their names. So let's go into the functions now. So understanding the function of the brain is more tricky because, to be honest, as IB students, the amount you guys need to know is very minimal, which kind of makes it confusing to understand some things sometimes because you get fed a little bit of information and now you think you should understand everything, but really you shouldn't, okay? So we're gonna give you a little bit of information that you need to know. So everything I'm writing here, just make sure you know that. To understand the brain, it's someone's job out there, a neurologist, a neurosurgeon, and they spend their whole life trying to understand the brain. So don't blame yourself if you don't understand exactly what's going on. You're not supposed to at this level. Just try and take a little bit of information away that you guys should know for the IB here, okay? So the function of the brain, remember, the brain, part of our central nervous system, is responsible for those three things we mentioned before. Let's go back to that. Receiving information from our peripheral nervous system, the worker of the big boss, interpreting that information somehow, and then initiating some sort of response. So when we look at the brain here, okay, it has two parts, okay, conscious and unconscious part. Let me show you. So the brain can control conscious things, like you can use your brain to move your muscles. Okay, you can use your brain to feel sensations, right? To feel pain, to feel temperature, to feel pressure, to feel vibrations. Your brain can also be a place like a USB or a storage device for emotions and memory and problem solving. You can use your brain to solve problems, right? Now, it can also be involved in some unconscious things, right? For example, heart rate, breathing, blood pressure. You don't think about these things, but your brain regulates these things somehow, okay? So know that both conscious and unconscious things are involved in the function of your brain. So look here, I kind of rearranged a little bit the labels because we labeled it here, but when I started filling stuff in, it looked like a mess. So here I'm kind of rearranged it, but same diagram, same structures. So we're first going to look here at our cerebrum. So this little big meaty part. By the way, the brain is as jelly as it appears on TV. If you ever go study medicine or science or something like that and you do anatomy, maybe you'll see a cadaver with a brain and you'll see it's really quite jelly. Anyways, so the cerebrum has these four lobes. So I'm going to give you one thing that these lobes are responsible for, but that's not all that they're actually responsible for. Just know for the IB this one thing I'm telling you. Okay, so the cerebrum is largely responsible for part of these conscious activities. So let's start off with this one here, the frontal lobe. This lobe, a part of this lobe, has many functions, but again, I'm only giving you one you guys need to know. This frontal lobe is responsible for initiating our motor actions. From this area of the brain, it will decide to move your muscles. Okay, so know the motor region is in the frontal lobe. Okay, the parietal lobe, this one here, is responsible for sensations. Okay, so your sensory things, the pressure, the temperature, touch, all of these things are going to be interpreted here in your parietal lobe. This part interprets sensations. Okay, so motor, sensations. Now what about occipital? One thing that the occipital lobe does is it interprets vision. So one kind of sensation, vision, is interpreted here in your occipital lobe. Okay, so you can imagine if this area gets damaged, you could be blind. Okay, that's very important. You can think about diseases like this. If this area is damaged, maybe you can't feel certain things. If this area is damaged, maybe you can't move a certain limb or something. Okay, so you can think about diseases as you look at these functions. Temporal lobe, so again, bringing this one out, this lobe here on the most ear side, that one, is responsible for hearing. Okay, so sensations related to hearing will go to this area. Okay, so let's keep it to this simple level. Okay, so now you know one kind of function of each of these lobes. Okay, it's not that simple, but for the IB it is. Okay, now let's go into some other ones. The cerebellum, so this guy here, what does it do? So remember how we said this frontal lobe initiates motor contraction. So from this area, you decide to move your bicep. Now, what is the cerebellum also has a function in muscle control, but it's a bit different from the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe initiates, it decides, okay, let's move that bicep. What the cerebellum does, so this freaky guy here, is it, let me show you here the word. It coordinates, that's the perfect word. It coordinates the voluntary movements. So for example, if you decide to move your arm to pick up your pen, what's happening is, as you're moving it, you're initiating it from this area, but all you're doing is initiating it. This area is not going to ensure that this movement is steady and precise and controlled, okay? So the cerebellum is going to make sure that this movement that's been initiated is going to be fine, controlled, and smooth. So it coordinates these voluntary movements. So in that way, it also controls your balance, your posture, equilibrium, basically making the movement smooth and controlled. So here I have, to help you remember this, the guy, forgot his name now. Clumsy from the Smurfs, okay? Because he has a problem probably with his cerebellum if he can't walk properly and he's clumsy all the time, right? So that's very important. That's a key distinction between the function in the muscle contraction that this one has compared to the motor region. Okay, so it does not initiate. That's the key thing. So anything, walking, all of that requires coordination. Hand and finger movements, when you pick up the right thing at the right pace, all of these require cerebellum, and even speech and things like that to make sure it's smooth. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense for you guys. Okay, what about these guys, pituitary and hypothalamus? So notice, going back to the ball sack here, this guy and this guy here. We're going to talk about these later. Look here in our little outline. We're going to talk about them related to hormone integration, hypothalamus and pituitary gland. So don't worry, we're not going to go into anything regarding that right now. Okay, that's why I put a sun here. Anytime I put a little sun here, it means we're going to talk about it later. The pineal gland as well, we're going to talk about it later. Come again here, see? Pineal gland and melatonin, we'll talk about that one later. That's why I put a pillow here, because it has a function related to sleep, controlling our sleep, our circadian rhythm. So our last one here that we should focus on, brainstem. Brainstem, so this guy coming off of the brain here, it is firstly a relay center. So you can imagine everything that comes from our body, the nerves coming up the spinal cord, first has to go through the brainstem before it can go to all of these areas, right? So the brainstem relays information between the cerebrum, our body, our peripheral limbs, our cerebellum. It's a relay center. Things that go to different areas of the brain usually pass through our brainstem first. So firstly, it's a relay center, okay? Secondly, it is responsible for certain functions of our autonomic nervous system. So remember, the cerebrum was kind of part of our conscious activities, this one here, all these things we can perceive and think about. So a lot of our unconscious activities, so our autonomic nervous system, is controlled here in our brainstem. So one part of our brainstem, and we'll look at this more later, so don't worry about this for now, just grasp this basic information now. One part of our brainstem, called the medulla, or medulla oblongata, will regulate our breathing and our heart rate. And we're going to look at this later in this video when we talk about, let me show you here, control of heart, lungs, and alimentary tract, okay? So just know for now that it has some roles in our things we cannot control, our unconscious activities. So for the last part of our nervous system structures, I want us to talk about receptors. So receptors, you learn about this whole thing, a concept of receptors in HL, but it's a different kind of receptor. When we talk about receptors now, we're referring to neurons. So let me show you what I mean. So a receptor, when we talk about our brain and our nervous system, it refers to a neuron, so a nerve cell, that is capable of transduction. Transduction means converting a physical stimulus, and we'll see what that is. That can be touch, temperature, chemicals, anything like that. converting this physical stimulus into an electrical signal that can then be sent to your brain, okay? So when we look at our, again, coming back to this, I love this diagram, our nervous system, these nerves coming to and from our central nervous system or our brain, these things pick up different kinds of physical stimuli. For example, our sensory neuron, it can be many things. This kind of receptor can be one that picks up temperature, another neuron maybe picks up pressure, another one picks up pain, right? There's many kinds of neurons that pick up different signals. So these are different receptors, right? So coming back to this. So for example, we can split our receptors, so these neurons that pick up signals, into two categories, conscious and unconscious. So conscious receptors, what we mean by this is these are neurons that pick up things that we're aware of. So for example, let's go. First category is chemoreceptors. Chemo means chemical. So these are going to be receptors or neurons that pick up chemicals. So for example, look here, the sense of smell, like when you're in your nose. So these may be located in your nose. So it picks up good smells, things like that, or in your tongue for tasting. But even what's interesting about this one, as we learn later in this video, is these chemoreceptors can technically even be a part of the unconscious category, because there are some of them that's located inside your vessels, which we'll look at later, so don't worry about it for now, that can pick up chemicals like carbon dioxide and oxygen levels, which is very important, which we'll see later. But for now, just this is fine. Now, another kind of receptors. What other kind of thing can these nerves pick up and send to our brain? Photoreceptors. We can have some photoreceptors. These neurons are specialized receptors that pick up light. Photo means light. So you can imagine these can allow you to have vision. So where would these be located? In your eyeball. So these, the nerves in the back of your eye and your retina, they are specialized to pick up the physical stimulus of light waves. Okay? What else? Mechanoreceptors. So these might be located kind of everywhere on your skin or whatnot. These pick up pressure. So when you get touched by someone, your skin can feel that pressure and send that signal to your brain thanks to the specialized receptors or neurons here that are made for picking up pressure. Not only are they located on your skin, but also in your ear. Because remember, sound stimulates these nerves in your ear because sounds are waves, and waves can exert some pressure. Cause vibrations, and these nerves can pick up these vibrations or pressure to determine what sound you're hearing. Okay, so that's also very interesting. Our last one here, part of the conscious category, because we're aware of all these, is thermoreceptors. Okay, so you even have some specialized nerves in your skin and whatnot that can pick up how warm you are, how cold it is, things like that. That's very important. Let's go to our unconscious category. So you can try and think of these already by yourself, but they might be pretty hard. Baroreceptor. So baro is, if you break it down, means pressure. Baro means pressure. So these receptors are very special and they pick up pressure. So these are especially located in your blood vessels, and we'll see where specifically later in this video, because we're going to talk about this more later. But they're located in the walls of your blood vessels. So when your blood pressure is very high, it will cause stretching of these vessels and trigger these special neurons, these baroreceptors that will send signal to your brain to cause a certain response. So that's pretty cool. And we're unaware of this, so it's unconscious. So it's located in these two places. Don't worry about these names. We're going to look at it later. Okay, osmoreceptors. So osmolarity. So basically the water content. That's what osmo means, the water content. So these receptors or neurons pick up water content in your blood. So your blood is made is liquid, right? So it's got water in it. And sometimes you have low blood pressure, so you may have low blood volume. And so these receptors can pick up the amount of fluid in your blood and kind of send that to your brain to initiate a response. And these we'll talk about these more later, which is why we have a sun on them. Okay, so all of these we have sun on. It's going to be more detail later. Okay, last one here for unconscious, proprioceptors. This one's very cool. And it basically, you take it for granted, but when you close your eyes and you walk around without falling over, why don't you fall over? Because you're not able to see where you are or see what you're doing. Why don't you fall over? Why? Close your eyes right now. When you lift up your arm, how do you know where the hell your arm is? Because you can't see it, right? You can't see it. So how do you know your arm is above your head when you're lifting it above your head? How do you know that? Even you can close your eyes and ask your friend to take your finger and move it up and down and stop at some point, and you have to say, is it up or down? You'll know, okay? You're able to do this because of proprioceptor. These are little receptors that basically give you awareness of where your limbs are. So they're located in your joints and your arms and your legs and things like that. And as you move, they send these receptors send signals to your brain to tell you where your limb is. So in this way, you're aware of where things are. Okay. And this is very cool because that means if you close your eyes, you have a pimple on your forehead, even if you close your eyes, you can still pop that pimple because you know exactly where your fingers are because of proprioceptors. You know where your positioning, your body positioning is, and you can coordinate yourself very well to pop that pimple, right? Because you're aware of where your limbs are. So that's the role of receptors. Very, very cool. We have so many of these different kind of receptors, even more than these, but these are the ones you need to know for the IB. So I hope this picks up the idea and kind of goes into more detail on what these peripheral nerves can be and how they can pick up different signals, different neurons pick up different signals and all of that, okay? So now we're done with all the structural stuff. Now let's actually go into the details of nervous system integration, how our nervous system controls certain actions and things like that. So we're going to start off with how our nervous system perceives sensation or carries out sensation and motor responses. So this is going to be really interesting, and we're going to use a story to help this be more easy to remember. So here we got our brain, our central nervous system, our brain stem coming off of it, and then eventually becoming our spinal cord. Then here is a transverse section, so you can see it's our spinal cord, and we'll cut it open just to see what's going on the inside. And coming off of our spinal cord here is our nerves, our spinal nerves. This area here inside the spinal cord, that's darker, we call that gray matter. And all the rest here, the surrounding it, is white matter. And we'll see exactly what that means later, okay, in this explanation. So let's say you're playing a game of tag, okay, a game of tag. So we're going to start here with sensory neurons, the role of sensory neurons. We know sensory neurons carry information from our body towards our central nervous system, from the receptor that picks up that sensation. We just talked about all of these sensations that they can pick up from that sensation, and carrying that sensation all the way to your brain where you can perceive that sensation. So we're going to use the example of touch, okay? Obviously this applies to other kinds of sensations as well. We're just going to use this one for the sake of understanding this concept, guys. So let's start. Let's say you're playing a game of tag with your homies, okay? Because that's what you guys do at this age, right? Of course not, right? But whatever. You guys play tag. So to play this game, you have to realize that you've been touched, okay? So someone has to touch you. The signal has to be sent to your brain, specifically where? This area here, right? Your parietal lobe, where you perceive sensation. Then, after realizing and being aware that you've been touched, now your motor area will try and stimulate your body to attack or chase the next person, right? So that's the basic idea here of the story we're going to use. So let's start off. So step one, the skin of your body, okay, contains these sensory receptors. Let me show you. In this case, we're going to use the example of mechanoreceptors, so pressure receptors, and they will be stimulated. Okay, so you can see this is our skin. Someone's touching you because you're now being tagged. Now these receptors can pick up pressure, okay? And that stimulates this receptor. Now this receptor will convert this pressure, the signal, this physical stimulus, into an action potential, and it will send it all along from wherever you've been touched, your back, your bottom, your arm, whatever, all the way to your spinal nerves and then into your spinal cord, okay? Now, when it goes into your spinal cord, it's going to go specifically to the gray matter, okay, this area here. Now, here in the gray matter, it's going to synapse, meaning meet with another neuron and transfer the signal to this next neuron. Like that, okay? Now the signal has been transferred to this neuron by synapses, and now it's being transferred up and up and up and up. Now, at some point, it may synapse with another neuron, okay? So as it travels up here, notice how it leaves now the gray matter. It leaves the gray matter and comes up the white matter all the way up. So it's going to travel up on the white matter part, all the way up through the brain stem until another neuron that it meets where it will synapse once more. After it synapses once more, this last neuron will now carry the signal to the parietal lobe. So you can feel the sensation and be aware of it. So now you're aware that you've been touched, okay? So let's put some more keywords here. So skin, these are going to be our mechanoreceptors, our brainstem here, and finally our parietal lobe, right? So again, quick recap. You've been touched. receptor gets activated and converts that stimulus into an electrical stimulus, sends it to the gray matter where synapses occurs to a new neuron. This neuron will now carry the signal further up through the brainstem, through the brainstem to synapse with another neuron, which will then carry the final stretch to your parietal lobe, and now you'll be aware of that sensation. Now, coming back to this area, what makes this area gray? What makes this area here gray is the fact that there's all of these cell bodies. You know, the head of the neuron, the nucleus area, that's called the cell body. Now, that area is much more dense, so it appears much more dark. So this area is the area where all of these synapses occur from all areas of your body. So you can imagine it's going to have all of these cell bodies, these heads of the neurons, and therefore it appears darker. So the gray matter looks dark because all of the synapses occurring here. Whereas the white matter, these areas out here, they don't have any of these synapses happening. They only have the axons of the neurons, only these long stretchy parts, which are not so dense. So therefore they appear not gray. Okay, so that's what makes the color difference between gray matter and white matter. Okay, just the synapses. Okay, so now you've been touched. Now you feel, oh man, I've been touched now. Now I gotta tag someone. So what's gonna happen is, you've been touched. Now you need to initiate a response. So what's gonna happen is this. This area, what do we call this area? Your frontal lobe. Remember, this area was the lobe responsible for initiating motor responses. So it will now send a signal via a motor neuron. So remember, this time it's a motor neuron. Remember a motor neuron? It sends things from your central nervous system away towards your muscle, the opposite direction than a sensory neuron. Okay, so it sends it via an upper motor neuron, UMN. So when I have the word UMN, it just refers to upper motor neuron because we call it the upper motor neuron, the first neuron that comes from the frontal lobe. Okay, the second neuron that comes after the synapses is the lower motor neuron. Okay, so now, let's say the upper motor neuron carries a signal now. Where does synapses happen? Here in the gray matter. So it carries it all the way to the gray matter where it synapses now with a lower motor neuron. Let me make this match. Yes, so the synapses happen now with a motor neuron, lower motor neuron, and this one now will carry the signal all the way to our muscle cell. Let me put a muscle here. And now here, this neuron, in the muscle video where we learn about muscle contraction, you'll remember that basically now this neuron will release a neurotransmitter, okay, called acetylcholine. And this neurotransmitter is a little molecule that basically goes to the muscle cells and stimulates them to contract. So now you can go contract your muscles and run to try and tag the next person, right? Okay. Lower motor neuron. Muscle. Okay. Forgot the first step here. So as an overall summary for how this works is, again, you get tagged, the signal gets sent from this receptor to your parietal lobe. Then now you're aware of that. Remember, this is all awareness. We're all aware of this, all the stuff in the cerebrum. And then you realize you've been tagged because of the pressure. Now you initiate a motor response by sending signals to your muscles, the appropriate muscles, to contract and now chase this next person. So that's very cool. Now we can see this is one example of how our nervous system controls sensation and movement, consciousness. That's part of our conscious awareness, right? So that's very, very interesting. So the sensation and motor response that we just learned we were both, this is part of our conscious awareness. We were aware of the sensation and aware that we were going to move our muscle because we decided to move our muscle. Now we're going to learn about the reflex arc. And this one's interesting because it's a reflex. So what this means is that we're not aware of it. We didn't mean to move our arm. It moved out of reflex. So this is going to be interesting. And we're going to look at the reflex arc, and we're going to compare this to what we just saw to see how they're different. So how does this work? What's different about it? So a reflex arc is a reflex is an immediate involuntary response to a painful stimulus, right? So when you touch a very hot pot, when you move your hand, but you didn't even think about it, but it moved, right? So what makes up a reflex arc, as we're going to see very shortly, is three things, three neurons: a sensory neuron, an interneuron, and a motor neuron. Let's see how this works. I'm gonna go through the steps and you'll see how this makes sense. So here we got a hand, okay? You love making eggs in the morning, but you don't love touching the hot pot, okay? The hot pan. So you're gonna go, what happens is you accidentally touch that pan. So what's gonna happen? Okay, your finger, okay, has certain receptors. Guess what these are? Okay, these receptors are nociceptors. So you encounter, step one is you encounter this painful stimulus, okay, whether it be the hot pan or whatever it is, right? Now, step two is now the receptors in your skin, the special ones that pick up pain called nociceptors, they will now pick up this stimulus and convert it into an electrical stimulus. So we can see here, they're going to convert now this pain into an electrical stimulus and send it to your brain, right? That's what normally should happen when you touch something warm. So now it comes through this pain receptor, the sensory receptor, right? Anything that goes towards your central nervous system is a sensory receptor. So here it goes, it travels as normal to our gray matter, right? Because this is where it usually will synapse to send a neuron up towards your brain so you can feel the pain, right? But with a reflex, it works different, and you'll see what's so cool about it. Okay, so here it goes into the spinal nerves as before. Just gonna label this stuff so it's clear. Now it enters the spinal cord. By the way, any neuron that goes towards your central nervous system, like a sensory neuron, you can also call an afferent neuron. An afferent, it goes towards your central nervous system. So if you see that word, now you know what it is. And it's synapses here, okay? Still synapses, but in a reflex arc, it doesn't synapse with a neuron that will now go up towards your parietal lobe to feel the sensation. Now it's going to synapse with another neuron called an interneuron, okay? Interneuron. This kind of neuron is very interesting, and because it picks up the signal now from the sensory neuron, and instead of going to the parietal lobe, it's going to transfer the signal directly to a motor neuron. Look. It synapses and transfers directly with a motor neuron. Okay, and this motor neuron then takes this action potential and sends it towards your muscle, right? Then there we are, step 5. And then again, what's going to happen is the acetylcholine will be released just like before, and the muscle will be triggered to contract, to be able to move your finger away from this painful stimulus, right? Now, bear in mind here, an interneuron, this one, is only located in the CNS. So you'll never see it as one of these neurons here. It's always in the CNS, and it's located in between the sensory and this motor neuron, okay? An interneuron. Sometimes you may even see the word relay neuron, okay? Now, so what I want you to really understand here is when you touch something warm, when you have a sensation, the sensory neuron can pick it up and send it to your brain, right? Which will take a longer time for you to perceive this sensation. But also it can synapse with an interneuron to have a reflex. Both of these things are going to happen, okay? But we're only showing here the reflex part, okay? So why is this reflex important? Think about it. It's very, 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 very interesting. Okay, let me show you. What's happening? So the purpose is to pull your finger away from the painful stimulus as soon as possible before you even feel the pain, okay? Because think about it. When you touch something very warm, you move your hand and then you feel the pain. That's because this reflex was so fast that you moved your hand before this neuron that goes to your brain could reach your parietal lobe for you to feel the pain. So that's the point. This reflex is so fast, so you move your hand away before this neuron can allow you to feel, to synapse all the way to the parietal lobe so you can feel the pain. So that's useful because this limits damage. So it limits damage to your body. So you can remove your hand from this painful stimulus before damage. Because if you had to rely on this pathway, going all the way to your brain to feel it, then being like, oh, that's painful, then decide to move your hand away, that would take a lot of time and you will have damage, right? So that's the purpose of our reflex, okay? It's unconscious, involuntary, and allows you to limit damage because you're not even thinking about it, okay? But you will still feel the pain. Don't get me wrong here. You'll still feel the pain because this neuron will also synapse with another neuron that will take the signal up to your brain. So you will feel it, but after the reflex, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Oh, here's also a little butterfly to help you remember the gray matter. It's like a butterfly for those who wanted to see. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. That's what's cool about our pain reflex arcs. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how our nervous system can integrate and control some of our organs. Okay, some of our organs here. So for example, let's start off here with the heart. Now, to understand how our nervous system controls our heart, our lungs, and our alimentary tract, real quick, let's overview some big important concept. So check this diagram out. We got this person, right? So take this sports person, a rugby player. He's got a lot of blood, right? This is a blood vessel here carrying the blood around his body. Now this here is going to represent the cells of his body, maybe his muscle cells, maybe whatever, any kind of cell. Now we know, right, our cells, one of the main things they do is cellular respiration, right? To the purpose being to make ATP, because our cells need ATP, our body needs ATP to stay alive and do a lot of important things, right? It's like money for the cell. Now the thing is, when a cell does cellular respiration, in order to do so, it uses oxygen to break down glucose, right, to form ATP. But as a byproduct, it makes carbon dioxide, right? Now, so this means we're reducing the amount of oxygen in the blood because we're using it, but we're increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood because we're making carbon dioxide as a byproduct. Now, so under normal circumstances, we have two very important systems that are going to control this, that are going to be responsible and involved in this. For example, our lungs, right? So we continuously inhale and exhale, and the purpose of that is to bring in more oxygen to replenish that has been used by our cells because we're using it, so now we're replenishing it. And we're also getting rid of all the excess byproduct, the waste product of carbon dioxide, right? That's important. Now, not only that, we need our cardiovascular system, right? This little heart that has these 4 chambers that you learned about in another video, and that's how its job is to pump blood around our body, because it's no use to have this organ that removes carbon dioxide and puts in oxygen if there's no organ that can pump the blood to actually reach the cells of our body and to pump blood to reach our lungs so that this can even happen in the first place. Now, here's the big question I have for you. There are 2 circumstances in which we will maybe increase our heart rate and our respiratory rate. Why? Why would we want to increase these 2 things? There are 2 reasons. Number 1, anticipation. So for example, let's say this rugby player sees this massive guy running at him, about to tackle him, right? So he's going to get afraid. His nervous system, his brain, right, is going to, if we come back to that one picture here of our brain, his parietal lobe is going to receive all of these sensations, like, and he's going to interpret it and be like, oh, I'm afraid. I need to do something now. So then his body is going to prepare him for battle. So there's one way in which your heart rate and your lung rate will increase is when your brain anticipates that you are going to require an increased heart rate and an increased lung ventilation rate, because soon your cells are going to work very hard. Soon he is going to run very fast and need to tackle this guy or be tackled. So one way is anticipation. When your body anticipates, your nervous system anticipates you're about to be in big trouble. And then it will increase your heart rate and increase your lung ventilation rate to be able to prepare for your cells that are going to work very hard soon. And the other way is when your cells are already working hard. So let's say he's very chill, it's a Sunday morning and he wants to just go for a run. So he goes for a run. There's no stress, there's no big problem, no threat, but he starts running and his muscle cells will now start making more carbon dioxide and using more oxygen because he's requiring more ATP. He's running, he's doing exercise, his cells are working harder. Now, his lungs and his heart will respond to this and notice, he's doing exercise, we need to start working. So you can see the 2 ways in which these 2 systems would start increasing their activity is either because he's anticipating activity or he is doing activity and now his organs are responding to that to try and match the demand that his cells have. Okay, so that's the 2 big things I want you to understand. Here's just words that I basically tried to say. Okay, so now my question is, how does our nervous system control this response? How does it work? So now we're going to take a look at the role that our nervous system plays in controlling the feedback of our heart and controlling our heart rate. Okay, So the key thing is we're first going to look at the anatomy here. So here we got our heart. You can see our heart. When we open it up, you can see all the chambers. You can see the nerves here controlling heart rate. A lot of stuff going on, right? Now, the thing is, you can see this big vessel here is called our aorta. That's the biggest vessel coming out of our heart that's going to distribute blood to our legs down here. You can see the pipes coming down into our neck and our arm and everything. That's the biggest vessel, our first one. Now notice in this big vessel, we've got two important nervous system structures. We've got these receptors, okay? These white ones here, we call the baroreceptors. And then these dark ones, these black ones, we're gonna call our chemoreceptors. So we can see that we have both chemoreceptors around the aorta here, and chemoreceptors are usually located outside of our blood vessels. You can see here, they're outside, right outside our blood vessels. See, even up here. But the baroreceptors, so the pressure receptors, they're located in the wall of our vessels, not inside the vessels, but in the wall. So you can see here, there's one located here in the aorta, but also here in the vessels here in our neck. These vessels here in our neck, these big ones, if they get cut, you're definitely dead, my man. These are called our carotid arteries, and they can branch off and things like that. So at this branching point, we've got these baroreceptors here, okay? And remember, here, so now I'll show you the key summary here. So the baroreceptors, these white ones that are located in these two areas, they are responsible for picking up pressure, because baro means pressure. We saw that before, and we're going to see why this is very important in this video. Now, they are located in these two places. I don't want to go more into that. Now, our chemoreceptors, what they do is they pick up chemicals. So in terms of our heart, in terms of this topic that we're talking about now, the chemoreceptors, they can pick up three important things: carbon dioxide level, oxygen level, and pH level. Okay, now they are located in the same place as these baroreceptors. The only difference is they're outside of the blood vessels. Okay, that's the only key things we need to understand from here. We're going to see now exactly what role they play and how they actually work in controlling our heart rate. So first and foremost, the first way that I want to mention that our nervous system can control our heart rate is from our cerebrum. Remember, we have here, in our cerebrum, we can pick up all of the sensations like sight, like hearing. And if you have some sort of threat that you're picking up by your vision or your hearing or anything like that, now your cerebrum can initiate a response and send this signal by these red arrows here that I'm showing to a place in your brain stem. Now remember from before when we talked about the brain structure, our brain stem was very important because one of the things it did was it regulated some autonomic nervous system functions like your heart rate and your breathing rate. So we're going to see more about that right now. So let's say you are very threatened and your brain picks up all these threatening signs. It will send a signal, okay, to your brainstem, specifically an area here called the medulla, and I'll put the word down for you guys very shortly. Now, after that, the medulla will pick up that signal and then send it to your heart to increase your heart rate. So if we slice the heart open here, we can see now the inside of it, and we know there are these areas inside your heart that regulate your heart rate. So, but you learned this in HL, so for SL, just remember this concept for now. So there's this area called your SA node that regulates your heart rate so that it's consistently beating all throughout the day. Now, because of this signal that you got from a threatening environment, your medulla is sending a signal. Usually it sends it by one of two neurons. Either your sympathetic neurons, remember these we talked about before, were your flight or fight neurons. And then the parasympathetic neurons was the rest or digest. So in this case, because you are threatened, which one is going to send the signal? The fight or flight one, right? So the signal will now go to your heart rate, your SA node, and tell it, my guy, normal is not good anymore. There's a bear. We got to increase this heart rate so our muscles can get all the blood they need so we can escape. So in that way, we can already control our heart rate with our nervous system. Now, the other way that I need to mention now is with regards to these baroreceptors and chemoreceptors that we just talked about. Let me show you. So remember, say you are in a scenario where you're bleeding out. You've gotten injured or you're very dehydrated. So you can imagine in this scenario, your blood volume will be low because you're losing blood. So the thing is, this means your blood pressure is going to decrease, right? So look here, your blood pressure is decreasing because there's less blood in your vessels. And if there's less blood pressure, that means that you don't have adequate blood flow to your cells. You can imagine like a hose pipe outside. If there's not much blood in the hose pipe, not much water, then there's not going to be a strong spray coming from the hose pipe. So we need to so when there's low blood pressure due to low volume because you're losing blood, your blood pressure is decreasing, and that means your cells are going to get less blood, and that's a bad thing because you'll die soon. So the thing is, because of these baroreceptors in the wall, remember they're in the wall of your blood vessels, these little white guys, they can pick up pressure. So when your blood pressure is low, that means there's less stretch of these vessels. So like this scenario here, for example, less stretch. Now, when there's less stretch, now these baroreceptors that pick up stretch will send less signals. So these arrows are signals being sent. Will send less signals to your medulla, the same place that we talked about before. Let me show you. So they'll send less signals than compared to if they were stretched. Okay, now the confusing thing here is when you're sending less signals, that's gonna concern this medulla, this cardiovascular control center. It's gonna be like, I'm not getting enough messages. That must mean there's something wrong. So I'm gonna send a message to my heart to increase the rate so that the pressure can come back to normal. So this is confusing to you because you might be like, okay, so less signals being picked up will speed up the sending of signals to the heart to increase the rate. Yeah, a good way to remember this, an analogy is like this. So when you go out on the weekend, right? The more messages you send your family, like for example, this scenario here, the less concerned they will be because they'll be like, I know where my kid is. I don't have to worry. I don't have to do any kind of action. I can just sit on the couch, chill and watch my movie. But if you go out and you almost never send them a message, like telling them where you are and all that, what's gonna happen? They're more likely to be like, I'm not getting any messages. I'm worried that something happened to my kid. I'm gonna call the police. I'm gonna go and track them down. I'm gonna have action. So that's the same way here. So less signal being sent means this guy is gonna be concerned and send a signal to the heart to speed it up to increase the pressure back to normal. More signal being sent will mean it's not concerned. It's not gonna speed up the heart rate. It's gonna let the heart chill, because there's enough pressure already. We don't need to increase it even more. Okay, so that's the idea here with this baroreceptor. So coming back to it, reduced blood pressure, less distension means less rate of action potentials will be sent to the medulla. It's going to get concerned. So the medulla is going to send signals now via which one? The sympathetic one, the one to increase the pressure, right? This fight or flight one. And it's going to tell the SA node to increase the heart rate, and the heart rate will pump faster and faster. If you're pumping faster, that means your stroke volume is going to increase. The stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped with each heartbeat. If you're pumping more blood but with each heartbeat, and you're pumping blood more fast, then the blood pressure will increase back to normal. So this is a kind of negative feedback. So at first the blood pressure was low, not normal, and we tried to have the system to increase it back to normal. Negative feedback. Now, the opposite thing can happen too. When you have high blood pressure, and then the opposite thing will happen where the center will send parasympathetic neurons to reduce the heart rate, or they will send no signals so that the heart doesn't go faster. So the opposite thing. So I don't want to go into writing more words just for that. It's the opposite idea. Okay, great. That's baroreceptors. Let's do our chemoreceptors here, okay? Chemoreceptors. So they don't come from these white spots. Chemoreceptors, very, very cool as well. So remember, chemoreceptors pick up one of these three things. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH, right? So for example, let's say you're doing exercise, okay? During exercise, what happens again? You're using oxygen, so your oxygen level is gonna decrease in the blood, and you're making more carbon dioxide, so it's gonna increase in the blood. So when this happens, when your cells are active, that means they demand more oxygen and they're releasing more carbon dioxide. And so what this means is our blood is now going to have lower oxygen, more carbon dioxide, and lower pH. Don't worry about this pH part yet. We're going to talk about this later in this video. It will make sense. Now, in this scenario, what's going to happen is these chemoreceptors will pick up these values, okay? We'll pick up these values from the chemoreceptors and send it to the same area. Now this area will be like, whew, low oxygen, high carbon dioxide, not good. That means our cells are working hard. We need to send them more blood. So now it's gonna, the medulla, this area, is gonna send impulses again to the SA node to increase heart rate. Same thing, to pump more blood to our cells because they clearly need it. They're demanding it, okay? So that will send more blood to our lungs and even our cells. And by sending more blood to our lungs, that's also a good thing because now our lungs can receive more blood and replenish the oxygen and remove that carbon dioxide that's building up. So that's the whole point of these chemoreceptors. So I hope this idea of the heart feedback control of the heart makes sense. It's a little bit complicated, but I hope the diagrams make it make sense. And also, as you can see here, you remember that these chemoreceptors are outside of the vessels. So you may wonder, how do they pick up oxygen, carbon dioxide, and things like that if they're not even in the blood? That's because there are teeny tiny little capillaries coming off of this big vessel that is going to go and supply these little chemoreceptors, and they will have little holes in them so the blood can leak out at a very slow rate, and they can kind of look at receive this blood and read what's going on, pick up the levels, and determine if it's good or not. Okay, so that's how they actually receive and analyze this blood. So now we're going to move on to the next system, our respiratory system, and see how the feedback control of the lungs work. And again, the first one I want to address is, again, you see a threat, right? You see a threat, you see this bear, your brain perceives this sensation, realizes you're now very nervous, very scared, and it sends this signal to your, again, the same area in your brainstem, the medulla. Now, this area is not the same one as the previous one. This is not the cardiovascular control center. This is the respiratory control center. Okay, now it sends a signal to this one, and this center has two areas, excitatory and or inhibitory. In this case, if you are very afraid, what do you want to do? You want to stimulate the excitatory center, the one to increase your respiratory rate so you can get in as much oxygen as possible to supply your cells, because you have to run away now and your cells are going to need that oxygen to make ATP, right? So that's one way. By stimulating this excitatory center, this respiratory control center, now it's going to go and send a signal, guess where? To your muscles of your respiratory system. So your diaphragm, this guy here, or your intercostal muscles, to stimulate them to contract so you can bring in more air and get rid of carbon dioxide, right? So that's one way. Now, how does the chemoreceptors work? How do the chemoreceptors influence this feedback control? Oh yeah, by the way, here's a little word just on what the whole lung does, right? Whatever, not too important. Now let's say these chemoreceptors that we talked about also in the previous slide, remember what we said. They can pick up when your tissues are active, blah, blah, blah. We have this scenario. You reduce oxygen, increase carbon dioxide, and reduce pH. Now, normally our pH is a little bit alkaline, so a little bit above 7, because 7 is neutral, right? Now, how exactly does pH matter? Let me show you. So when you make a lot of carbon dioxide here, look at this here, meaning you're doing a lot of cell respiration, your cells are very active, you're releasing a lot of this waste product. What's going to happen is they enter our red blood cells, okay, and they combine with water, H2O. And when these two react together with this enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, ACE, see, an ACE is an enzyme, it forms a product called carbonic acid. This acid, what happens is it will break apart into two components after it's formed, a bicarbonate ion and protons, H+. Now these protons, they are the thing that's actually acidic. So these protons will go into our bloodstream or wherever they want to go. And wherever they go, the more protons there are, the more acidic your blood becomes. So you can imagine when you do exercise, because you're having more carbon dioxide, you're actually going to reduce your pH a little bit, okay? So that's why the pH can decrease as you do more exercise of your blood, okay? So now these chemoreceptors, what happens is, right, they can pick up this signal. They can pick up reduced blood pressure through, that occurs this way, increase carbon dioxide, reduce oxygen, and they will send this signal, right, to, again, this respiratory control center. And this respiratory control center will pick it up and be like, oh no, our cells are doing a lot of activity, they need more blood, we need to increase our heart rate. So again, this medulla will now send a signal the same way. Let me come back to it, copy this one. The same way, it will send this signal now down to your SA node here to stimulate, to increase your heart rate so that more, oh no, sorry, I'm messing up hardcore here. It will now send a signal to your diaphragm and intercostal muscles to cause them to contract more, to bring in more air and get rid of all this carbon dioxide. More oxygen brings in, more carbon dioxide out. So your cells can get the nutrients and the oxygen they need, right? So that's how it works for this one. Now, these neurons, right, that send this signal can do one of two things. Again, like before, they can either be the fight or flight neurons, meaning they want to increase your respiratory rate, or if you're very relaxed, you're not doing exercise, and this center will pick that up through picking up these levels and realize, he's not doing exercise, he's chill. Let's send a signal by these parasympathetic neurons to decrease respiratory rate because he doesn't need to inhale and exhale so much anymore. Okay, cool. So again, the opposite thing can happen when you're not exercising. So I'm always putting one perspective here, but the opposite perspective also applies, guys. Okay, so that's it for this one. So next, we're moving on to the nervous system control of our alimentary tract. This is also really quite interesting. So you know our digestive tract, we talked about it before. When we eat food, the first thing we're doing is putting it into our mouth and swallowing the food consciously. We're deciding to do that down our esophagus, right? So we can control that with our CNS. We decide to swallow our food. That's voluntary. Now then it goes down to your esophagus and eventually you don't control anymore. Now it's automatic. So eventually the movement of the food further down the esophagus and the stomach and the intestines, you don't control that anymore. You only control the initial swallow, right? Now the stomach and the intestines, what they do is the whole job is to break down food and then absorb them into our bloodstream and get rid of the stuff we don't need, right? The feces. Now, the contraction and control of these are controlled by our CNS, but which component? Our autonomic nervous system, specifically the enteric nervous system. That's the part of the autonomic system that controls our digestive system. I mean, our contraction of our intestines and things like that. We're not aware of that. Now, here's the thing. The contraction and moving of food without our control is called peristalsis. So it's a series of these smooth muscles. Smooth muscle makes up all of the intestines and things like that. That is peristalsis, okay? The process of contracting and moving through food along these pipes. Now, how does it work? Let me show you. How does it work without our control? How does the process happen? So if we take a look here at a piece of intestine, let's say a piece of intestine. Say this here, the bolus is our food. What happens is this, okay? There's a few steps. The bolus is gonna, wherever it is, it's a certain mass. So it distends or stretches the alimentary tract. Wherever it is, that area is stretched. Okay, so for example, right now it's here. So that means this area here, these sides are going to have pressure. They're going to be distended. Now, when they are distended, there are special receptors here, part of our enteric nervous system, so these blue ones, that pick up this stretch, okay? Now, this stretch is then converted into a signal and it's transported throughout this neuron, this receptor, and then relayed to interneurons, or also known as relay neurons. Now, these relay neurons can do one of two things. Either it will go, in the case here, it will relay to an excitatory neuron, meaning this neuron is going to stimulate contraction. It's excitatory. It's going to excite this muscle to contract. Now, it's going to excite the part that is proximal to this mass. So, for example, say this side is our anus, and this side is our esophagus, okay? This is where the food came from, and this is where the food is going. So we're gonna contract the part where the food came from, because we don't want the food to go back up. We only want it to go down. But the problem is, if this part here is also contracted, then the food will just stay right here. So we want this area to relax, but this area to contract. So guess what? The area in front of this bolus. So the area behind is contracted. The area in front will be an inhibitory neuron, meaning this one relaxes muscles. It inhibits contraction. So now if this area is relaxed and this area is contracted, guess what? The bolus will move along. So you can see this is such a cool mechanism that is called peristalsis, and this allows our food to move without our awareness throughout our whole thing until it reaches our little butt crack, okay? So that's what you guys need to know about our control of our alimentary tract. Alimentary tract is just our food canal, which is the whole thing from our esophagus to our anus. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So now guys, we're done with the whole nervous system control thing. Now we're gonna go on to hormones, and this part is much easier, so let's just get straight into it. Remember our original story here of you seeing your teacher in public and you get all these signals and now you're afraid, you wanna run away. So how does our hormones can play a role here? So when you pick up these signals, your brain is picking them up. So the thing is, our hormones are controlled a little bit by our brain. So our brain is a starting point. So when he picks up these signals, his brain is going to feel this emotion of fear or anything like that, right? Now his brain will not only control his heart rate and his respiratory rate, as we just saw on the previous slides, it will also start getting the other troops involved, our hormones. So for example, the brain will then get our by the autonomic nervous system, remember? So if you're afraid, what part of our autonomic nervous system are we going to activate? The sympathetic or parasympathetic part? The sympathetic, right? We want to get our fight or flight mode on. So your brain, knowing that it's afraid now, is going to now activate our sympathetic neurons. And these neurons are going to go to our body and try and release some hormones. So for example, one that you guys need to know about is our kidney. Above our kidney, we have this gland called the adrenal gland. Okay, and this gland is really special because it makes adrenaline, but it doesn't make adrenaline without something telling it. So when this autonomic nervous system is activated and it's stressed, it's going to go send a signal via a neuron to this adrenal gland telling it, my guy, we need more help. We're not enough. We need this. We need your adrenaline. We need epinephrine. Epinephrine is just the science name for adrenaline. So we need you to release this epinephrine because we're not enough. We need everything working. So now, what does epinephrine do? It's amazing. Epinephrine does so much, but you guys already know all of this stuff. So epinephrine can do all of these things here. Look how many systems it can influence. That was the thing that was amazing about hormones, remember? They go into the bloodstream and they go all over the body. Remember, hormones were unique because they travel by bloodstream. So you can see they can influence everything. Your cardiovascular system, heart rate, blood pressure. It can allow you to breathe easier by dilating your air passages so more air can come in. It can increase your pupil size so you can see better and more aware of the environment. It can stimulate your liver to release more glucose because you need glucose now to make more ATP so you can run away faster. It will divert blood supply to your muscles. In other words, it will cause vessels to dilate to send more blood to your muscles and constrict to send less blood to your organs like your intestines because you don't need them right now. You don't need to digest that pizza you ate last night, but you need blood at your muscles. So it can divert and change the direction of blood supply to the organs that need them more in this very moment. Hey guys, we're almost there. We're down to these last two. If you're still here, damn, my hat's off to you. I know it's a long video, but maybe take a chill pill and come back, but we're almost there. So now we're going to talk about the pineal gland and melatonin. Do you remember the picture of a brain we looked at? One of the areas you guys need to know about is this part of the brain called the pineal gland. So because it's a gland, we know it's going to make a hormone. So what does the pineal gland do? Okay, this gland makes a hormone called melatonin. So I'm going to put a little pillow here because this hormone influences your sleep. It makes you want to go to sleep. Now, before we go more into that, what is your circadian rhythm? So a circadian rhythm is any kind of pattern of behavior. So every day we eat 3 times at a specific time and we sleep at a specific time, right? This is a kind of ingrained behavior. We get hungry. We happen to get hungry at a certain time every day, and we happen to get tired at a certain time every day. This is our circadian rhythm. Now, melatonin, this hormone, influences our sleep pattern, our sleep rhythm. Now, how does it work? What influences the production of this hormone that makes us want to sleep? So 2 things. The production, I wrote this out very carefully because I think it makes sense this way. So let's read this. The production of melatonin, so this hormone, is both automatic, okay? So it happens at the same time every day automatically, regardless of any kind of change in your daylight or darkness or anything like that. It's automatic. So the production of melatonin is both automatic and light dependent. The body's internal clock, which is the circadian rhythm, controls melatonin production in a roughly 24-hour cycle, even without external cues. So regardless of light, your body wants to make this melatonin every day at a similar time, blah, 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 right? But light can influence it to some degree. It can fine-tune it, okay? It can fine-tune this rhythm and melatonin production with the day-night cycle. So basically, light can influence it to make sure that this automatic production of melatonin occurs at the right time, to make sure that you're making melatonin at night when you're supposed to sleep instead of during the day. Okay, so in summary, light can influence the main way, which is the automatic production of melatonin. So we'll go more into that shortly. So when we look at organisms, there are nocturnal organisms, which are organisms that are more active at night, so not humans, and diurnal, which are organisms that are active during the daytime. So for diurnal organisms, melatonin will be high at nighttime. Melatonin will be high at nighttime. And I like to remember this because M for midnight, melatonin for midnight. So melatonin is highest at midnight for me and you, diurnal organisms, when we're supposed to be sleeping. Now, the thing is, we can affect our circadian rhythm, okay? We all know jet lag. Oh yeah, before I get into this, let me show you this diagram. So here's a diagram that shows time and then melatonin production. So you can see during the daylight, our melatonin production is at the lowest, and at the midnight, it's the highest, because this is when we're supposed to be sleeping. This is the case for diurnal organisms. It'll be the opposite for nocturnal. Now, the effect. So jet lag, we all know when you go and travel to another country where there's a big time difference, you really struggle to be awake when you're supposed to be awake and asleep when you're supposed to be asleep. Why is that? Because wouldn't light influence our melatonin production and make sure we're awake when it's light and we're asleep when it's dark? That's true, but remember, there's this automatic system that makes it automatically at a certain time. So when you suddenly change time zone, this automatic system will make this hormone at the same time it did yesterday. But unfortunately, now you're in a different country, a different time zone. So now this melatonin will be produced at the wrong time for this new time zone that you're in. But luckily, because this automatic system can be influenced by light, a few days later, this light stimulation at a certain time will kind of reinforce and adjust and slightly regulate your automatic system to now match the daylight and the nighttime of the new time zone that you're in. So I hope that makes sense. That's why it takes a few days for your body's internal clock to adjust to the new time zone, because of this automatic system that needs to first be influenced by light for a few days so your melatonin production can return to the right time for the new place, okay? So, and again, so light stimulation. So if you have stimulated by light, what light does is it kind of stimulates the pineal gland to inhibit melatonin production. And when it's dark, so for example, when it's dark outside, your eyes are closed or whatever, it's nighttime, therefore no light enters your eye. So now melatonin, the pineal gland will make melatonin that will cause you to sleep, right? So light can influence or inhibit melatonin production. So one kind of cool little thing they want you guys to know about, it's not really important. I really doubt they would ask this on a test, but just in case. Have you ever noticed when you take a picture of your dog, your cat at night, you look at the photo, their eyes are like really bright? That's because they have a special adaptation that allows them to see at night. Certain nocturnal animals like cats, because they do a lot of their activity at night. Let me show you how it works. So if we look at this picture of an eye, so this is where light goes in. So this is going to be your lens here. The light's going to go in, and this red part here is your retina. So in your retina, there are specialized receptors that pick up light. We talked about this before. Remember, one of the kind of receptors are photoreceptors. So they're located here, and they can pick up light and send that signal to your brain so you can perceive what you're seeing. Now, for humans, that's all we have. We only have this retina. We don't have this layer behind called the tapetum lucidum. So when light passes through our retina absorbs most of it so we can use it and see something, but some of it will pass through the retina and not be absorbed. Okay, so we're basically not 100% effective at absorbing light so we can see. But an organism like a cat or a dog, they have this layer. So what happens is they absorb most of the light in the retina, right? But some of it will pass through. But luckily, they have this layer called the tapetum lucidum that reflects the light back again. So it goes to the retina again for the second time. So in these organisms, the retina gets light exposure twice, once from the front and reflected again from the back. So they can make more effective use of the light and therefore see better at the dark. And this tapetum lucidum layer gives them this really bright color when you take a photo of them at night. So that's really, really cool. So here's the word form of what I just said. That's just a little fun fact to know. I really doubt it'd pop up on a test. So that's it for pineal gland and circadian rhythms. So we're down to our last part here of the hormones aspect, hypothalamus and pituitary gland. So this one you'll probably see as well in some other videos as we introduce them as well for some other topics, but let's go on to it here. So we got our brain. Where are they located again? You can see here the ball sack one that I like to see is the pituitary gland, and then this part right above it is the hypothalamus, because hypo means under, and guess what? The hypothalamus is under another part of the brain called the thalamus, but you guys don't need to worry about that. Now, what's the hypothalamus? Basically, it's a really cool part that acts as a link between our nervous system and our endocrine system again, okay? And we'll see exactly what I mean by that. Now, the pituitary has these two lobes, okay? One part called the anterior pituitary and the other called the posterior pituitary. Now, you can notice how the hypothalamus is linked to the pituitary glands. Now, how it works is the hypothalamus regulates the pituitary glands. So it decides when it wants the pituitary glands to release some kind of hormone, okay? So it's basically in control of what these guys do. So we're gonna look at an example. But basically, the anterior pituitary has some glandular cells here, meaning they make hormones. So some of the hormones that they make are these here. Don't worry about understanding them for this video, because as you go throughout the IB, you'll probably encounter these at some point, and then you'll learn what they are. For example, FSH and LH, you'll learn that when you learn about reproduction, sexual reproduction, and things like that. Prolactin, you'll learn about that as well when you learn about birth and things like that. TSH, you'll learn about that when you learn about temperature regulation. So don't worry about them. I'm just putting some names here. Now, the posterior pituitary, it releases two other hormones called oxytocin and ADH. For this video, we're really going to focus on ADH, but you'll learn more about ADH when you learn about the kidney in HL. So if you're an HL student, you'll learn much more about this in the kidney. Now, the thing here is, let me show you. The hypothalamus, like I said, can control the pituitary glands, but the hypothalamus also has receptors to pick up certain things, so certain variables. So it is considered to have receptors that has ANS function, so things that we're not aware of. So it can pick up signals related to temperature, glucose, water level, and things like that with these specialized receptors. And based on picking up those signals, it can decide if it wants the pituitary glands to release a hormone to influence that variable that they picked up. Okay, so that's how they sort of serve as a link between the nervous system and endocrine system, because the nervous system, the receptors and the neurons that pick up these signals in the hypothalamus can then link that signal to the endocrine system, which are these guys that are going to make hormones to change that variable and maybe do negative feedback or something like that. Okay. So we're going to use an example of ADH, okay, an ADH. So just understand the big idea here, and now we're going to use one example of ADH to show this. So the hypothalamus, right, we know it has these cells, these glandular cells, so hormone cells that can make certain hormone. In this case, the hypothalamus, it can make ADH. So when it makes ADH, it will send them via this neuron, okay, all the way down to the pituitary. And in the pituitary gland, it will be stored, okay, be stored. And I want you guys to for now know that ADH stands for anti-diuretic hormone, okay? But another way I want you guys to remember it is like this. You can think of ADH as anti-dehydration hormone. It's a hormone that helps prevent you from getting dehydrated, and we'll see how that works, okay? So first, hypothalamus makes this ADH here, the glandular cells that make hormones, and then it sends it by this neuron to the posterior pituitary. Now, the thing is, so now we have all of this ADH building up here. It's stored here in the posterior pituitary, ready to go to where they need to go. But until they get a signal from the hypothalamus, the pituitary cannot do anything. So remember how I said there are these receptors here that can pick up many things, one of which is water level. So there are these receptors called osmoreceptors. Remember, we saw that earlier in this video. Osmoreceptors can pick up water level or concentration. And when it notices the water concentration is low, so say, for example, it notices the water concentration is very low, the person is very dehydrated, okay? Then the hypothalamus will be like, okay, it's time. And then it will send a signal by this neuron again. The link between the nervous system and endocrine system is evident here. and it will tell the posterior pituitary, okay, release this ADH into the bloodstream. And again, it's a hormone, so it gets released into the bloodstream and it can go all over the place. Now, one of the key places that it affects is our kidney. So it's going to go to our kidney, okay, and it's going to influence the collecting some tubules inside the kidney. So it's going to tell these tubules, it's going to go and bind to these tubules in the kidney. Don't worry if you don't completely understand it. This will be an HL thing in another chapter. It will bind to the kidney tubules and trigger them to take water, reabsorb water back into the bloodstream, water that would have become urine. Because you know our kidneys make urine. So sometimes when you're dehydrated, you want to retain some of that water, so you pee a bit less, but you keep more water in your body. Now ADH does that. That's why I like to think of it as anti-dehydration hormone. It will suck up water from what would have become urine back into your bloodstream so that your water level can increase back to normal. So that's negative feedback because your hypothalamus picked up low water concentration, low water level, and it initiated this whole cascade involving your kidney and your posterior pituitary to reabsorb water so that your water level can be returned to normal. And again, like with everything else, the opposite is true. If you have very high water levels and all that's fine, then this thing won't happen and you won't absorb so much water and you'll pee out more, okay? So that's really cool. That's one example that you guys need to know. Just understand the big idea of what the relationship between the hypothalamus and pituitary gland and this example here of ADH to understand how it works. Now we're going to go into some questions. So here are some IB style questions, and it's only 3 here, but I have tons and tons and tons of them on the teachme.org website, so go check that out. So here we got a question. Which of the following correctly describes the sequence of events in a pain reflex arc? So look carefully. We know it's going to be a receptor, like a neuron that can pick up pain, and the signal will be sent through a sensory neuron, then the interneuron, then the motor neuron, then the muscle, right? So we know the answer here is going to be B. Now, which receptor type does not match to its respective stimulus? Baroreceptor, we know, picks up pressure, so no, it's not this one. It's going to be A. Which of the following is true regarding melatonin? This is the sleeping hormone, the midnight, M for midnight. It is produced by the pineal gland. Yes, that's true. In diurnal organisms, that's me and you, organisms active during the day, its concentration is highest at night. That's true. So 1 and 2 are true so far. But there's no 1 and 2 options, so it's got to be D, right? But let's just confirm. It plays a key role in regulating our circadian rhythm. Yes, it does. So the answer here is D. So that's it for this video. There was a ton of stuff, I agree. But hopefully I made it a bit easier for you guys. And I will see you guys in the next one.